All right, let me check and see if we are live. Greetings and welcome. Yes, we are live. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is the Moon of Israel, Solonomics 101, the Lev Project, episode 70, if you could believe it. um, wow, we're still in 30 years a slave from bondage to freedom. We're on our tail end of it, so to say, and it stuff just started picking up as I keep telling everybody. It just started picking up. Although I shout out to Brother Abia, he contacted me. He wanted to read. So I don't know if tomorrow or Thursday he'll be able to come in and read with us. But we definitely are still open as we were in the beginning to volunteering to read, because stuff just picked up on this, and so now I'm just trying to juggle everything. But I definitely have not forgotten about the Lev Project. Wherever you are right now, I want to just thank you for tuning in, as always, leaving your comments, subscribing to the channel, and finding some value in what we're doing. It's May, everybody. It's May. We've been doing this for 5 months, and we slowed down a little because, like I said last week, we had a little surprise in there, which is the underground show, and so we're doing a whole lot of analytics on that whole thing. So I think it's only 2 more episodes, and then I heard they got picked up again for another season. So I guess we have to stay tuned for that one. And then they just have another slave narrative coming up, Roots, I think, remake. That's May, the end of May. So we'll check it out and see. You know, again, sometimes people say slavery fatigue. They don't want to hear about it. But the truth to that is, I think the slowdown is a little bit good too. Because when you read continuously and not process it, you could kind of you know really stay in that mode and go outside and think that that's what it is right now. And I kind of found myself doing that, and I had to kind of process what I'm feeling and the emotions, and taking the time to allow it to go through, fluidly, and identify with whatever it is that you identify with and work through it. And so I think the slowdown was good, because yeah. But anywho, 30 Years a Slave from Bondage to Freedom by Lewis Hughes, on page 107 in my book anyway. And we're going to start at Union Raid at Master's Farm. So last time we checked, the Civil War had already popped off. Everybody's afraid, or the South, the Southerners are afraid that they're going to run off, as they would say, to join the Yankees, which were their enemies. And so a lot of that stuff is going on. So Union Raid, and the Union would be at the Master's Farm. It says, during the time the Union headquarters were in at Helena, a Union gunboat came down the river as far as Bolivia and stopped at Miles McGee's. And by the way, by this time, he tried to run away 4 times already. The soldiers made a raid through the farm, taking chickens, turkeys, meat, and everything that they could lay hands on. During this raid, Miles McGee came out of the house with a gun and shot the commanding officer of the party. He became alarmed over what he had done and hid in the cabin of one of the servants. He never came near the house. The Union soldiers came 3 different times to catch him, but never succeeded. The last time they came, he made for the cane brake and hid himself there until they were gone. But though he had escaped their righteous vengeance, he became so nervous that he left his hiding place in the cane breaker and went to Atlanta, Georgia, and stayed there among friends until things became more quiet. At last, weary of this, he determined to return to old Master Jack's, but not to his own home. Word had been received of his coming, and great preparation were made for his reception. After he had started on his return, he was taken ill on a train and was left a small town called Jackson, where he soon died. I drove the family to the depot upon the day of his expected arrival, and as the train came in, the women waved their handkerchiefs, and when the conductor stepped off, they asked him if Mr. McGee was abroad. He said, "No, I have his remains." The scene that followed I cannot describe. Such wailing and screaming. I could not but feel sad, even though they had treated me so meanly, causing the death of my children and separating me from my wife. Identifying with the oppressor. Some say Stockholm, some say traumatic bonding. He's saying it. He couldn't help but feeling sad, even though these people were wicked, evil, and did everything. Their grief was indeed great. The sad news was conveyed to his mother, old Mrs. Jack McGee, at the house by an advance messenger, and we soon followed with the body. He was the favorite son of his mother, and the grief was very great. But for his wanton shooting of the Union officer, he would probably not have met his death as he did. Union soldiers passed the Paloma home. One winter night, while I was at old Master Jack's, I was awakened by a rumbling noise like the heavy wagons which continued steadily and so long a time that I finally concluded it must be an army passing. And such I found to be the case upon getting up and venturing out, the rumbling which had awakened me being caused by the passing artillery. I was afraid to go out straight to the soldiers, but would take a few steps at a time, then stop and listen behind a tree or the shrubbery. All seemed quiet. There was no talking. I had listened about 20 minutes when there seemed to be a halt at the creek, some distance from the house. Soon afterwards, I heard the command given, "Forward!" I at once made up my mind that they were Yankee soldiers. I got on my knees and crawled to the fence, not daring to go openly, fearing that they might hear or see me and shoot, supposing me to be a spy. I went back into the house and told my wife that they were Yankees who had just passed. Uncle George, quote unquote, said this would be a good time for us to go. "Oh, no," said he, "we are not quite ready." Uncle George's cabin was where my wife and I stayed while at old Master Jack's. In the morning, I was to carry a parcel to Como, a place not far from home, to Mr. James McGee, who was in the rebel army. It was not quite daylight when I made ready to go on my trip, for I was anxious to find out more about the soldiers. Going to the stable and saddling my horses, I mounted and rode out to the big gate leading to the main road just as day was dawning. As I dismounted to open the gate, some soldiers were passing, and an officer sung out to me, "Hello, which way are you going?" I said, "To Como, to carry this parcel of clothing to my young master in the war." "You have a fine horse," said the officer. "I guess I will exchange horses with you." He took my package of clothing and some letters which I had to mail my horse, leaving me his, which was a very poor animal. I was badly scared at this performance, fearing that I was severely whipped for the loss of the horse and package. Yet how could I help it? He knew nothing but to serve a white man. He says, we knew nothing but to serve a white man, no matter what he asked or commanded. Oh man, no, I'm sorry. Let me go ahead and outline this one right here. Still doing my research. So he says, as a matter of fact, of course, I did not go to Como as I had nothing to take. The officer had everything but went back to the cabin. I suppose that the soldier had all passed, but in about a half an hour, Aunt Kitty, on looking on her cabin window, exclaimed, "My God, just look at the soldiers." The yard was covered with the blue coats. Another venerable slave said, "My Lord, the year of Jubilee am come." During the y'all like that right there. During the excitement, I ran to the big house and told the madame that the Yankees were there and had taken my horse and everything I had. Old Master Jack had heard the news but was not able to come out. He had risen, but when he knew of the presence of the Yankees, he went back to bed, calling for Kitty to get him a mush poultice. "Tell Kitty Itty to get me a mush poultice, Otis." It was customary after the beginning of the war for him to take sick and call for a poultice to put upon his stomach whenever he heard of the Yankees being near. He and many like him were especially valorous only when the bluecoats were far away. The soldiers went into the dairy and drank all the milk, helped themselves to butter, cheese, milk, bread, and everything in sight which they wanted. Nothing was said to them by the white folks, but the slaves were glad and whispered to each other, "Ah, we're going to be free." Old Master Jack, lying on his couch, could ask every little thing. "Where are they? Are they gone?" After they had all left the premises, he said, "My God, I can't stand it. Them devil evils." are just going through the country, destroying everything. I was sent down to get Uncle Peter for old master. And when Peter came up, the old man asked, well, did any of the servants go away? And sir, them devils look, Louis' horse and the clothes he had for his young master. Hiding valuables from the Yankees. We read a story. I believe it was in the narratives too. They were also hiding valuables from the Yankees. So hold on one second. She had her earrings, she said. No, she said the young master. So this is I'm ready to join the time distance through meals. Okay, we got Abia in the house. Let me give you the link here. 1 second. Go ahead. We are on page. I'm reading from the book. That's the link right there, brother Abia. Give me 1 second. Let me see. Hiding valuables from the Yankee. I'm on page 110 in my book. But let me see if it's the same thing on the book. And for anybody who's just joined us who may not be familiar with the Lev Project, for these documentaries, for these readings, the link to the free ebook or electronic copy is in the box. It's in the description box. So give me 1 second. Let me see if Abia is able to come in, and then let me see if you guys are able to get this link. No. But let me know. That's where we're at, or let me know when you get in so that we can pick up from there. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, he's not in yet. I'm not sure if he's still there, but I'm going to continue reading. What this thing did like that. Hold on, let me close some of these. Let me close some of these windows. Give me 1 second, please. All right, let me close up some of these windows here, so I can kind of see what I'm doing. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. Babies was trying to sneak some late night drink on me. Oh boy. All right. I see Brother Abia said he's almost there. Hiding valuables from the Yankees. It says right after this, the McGee's commenced planning to put away their valuables to keep them from the Union soldiers. It says here, all the servants had to fill up their bed ticks with fine gin cotton, the lint part for safekeeping. Great boxes and parcels were packed full of their best things and put into the cellar. Under the house, it was not exactly a cellar, but a large, shallow excavation which held a great deal. We put all the solid silverware, such as cake baskets, trays, spoons, forks, dishes, etc., in boxes and buried them under the hen house. Great packages of the finest clothing I had to make up, and these were given in charge of certain servants whose duty it was to run into the big house and get them. Whenever they heard that the Yankees were coming, and take them to their cabins. This was a shrewd arrangement, for the soldiers never went into the cabins to get anything. When the soldiers had passed, these packages were taken back into the house. It speaks well for the honesty and fairness of the slaves that such trust could be developed upon them, notwithstanding all the cruelties inflicted upon them by their masters. Very, very interesting. I think I hear Brother Abia in now, and that was I have some things to say, but brother, welcome. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
Oh, I'm here. I'm here, holding it up, not holding it down, holding it up. So, welcome back once again. For those who just joined us, we had Brother the Bia a few months ago, and he came on and read and participated, and I'm so glad he's here today, to lend your voice to this project. Do you have access to the link?
Yes, I do.
We're up to death to runaway slaves. Do you see that?
Let's trying to get caught up here. Yes, I'm there now.
All right. All right. Then the mic is yours.
Death to runaway slaves. It was about this time that the law or regulation of the rebel government was promulgated, authorizing or directing the shooting or hanging of any slave caught trying to get away to the Union Army. The Barbaros law was carried out in many cases. For every little while, we would hear some slave who was caught running away and hung or shot. A slave belonging to boss ran away and got safely within the Union lines, but he returned to get his sister. They both got away from the house, but had gone only a few miles when William McGee overtook them and shot the man dead. William boasted of this, but told Uncle Peter, the foreman, that he never wanted it mentioned. Slaves hung and left to rot as a warning. Two slaves belonging to one Wallace, one of our nearest neighbors, had tried to escape to the Union soldiers but were caught, brought back, and hung. All of our servants were called up, told every detail of the runaway and capture of the poor creatures and their shocking murder, and then compelled to go and see them where they hung. I never shall forget the horror of the scene. It was sickening. The bodies hung at the roadside where the execution took place until blue flies literally swarmed around them, and the stench was fearful. The barbarous spectacle was for the purpose of showing the passing slaves what would be the fate of those caught in the attempt to escape, and to secure the circulation of the details of the awful affair among them throughout all the neighborhood. It is difficult at this day for those not familiar with the atrocities of the institution of slavery to believe that such scenes could ever have been witnessed in this or any other civilized land. as a result of simply, excuse me, as a result simply of a human being's effort to reach a portion of the country where the freedom of which it was said to be the home could be enjoyed without molestation. Yet such was the horrible truth, in not one case alone, but in many, as I know only too well. Runaway slave caught and whipped. One day while I was waiting at dinner, some of the children from the slave quarters came running into the house and said to old Master Jack, "Uncle John is going away. He is down to the creek. He had been put in the carpenter shop, fastened in the stocks, but by some means he had gotten the stocks off his feet and got loose. All in the house immediately got up and ran out. Old Master told me to run and catch the runaway. I did not like to do it, but had to obey. Old Master and I had Old Master and I ran in pursuit and soon overtook him. He could not run as the stocks were still on his arms and neck. We brought him back and we was staked out. That is, four stakes were driven into the ground, the arms tied to two and the legs to the other two. He was then paddled with the whipping paddle upon the bottom of his feet by old Master Jack until blood blisters arose, when he took his knife and opened them. I was then sent for salt and water, and the bruises of the suffering chattel were washed as usual in the stinging brine.
You could go ahead one more. It's this is one more and then I'll
Okay,
last one until we get to chapter 5. So a home guard accidentally shoots himself. You could take that.
all right. After the capture of Memphis by the Union forces, the soldiers were in the habit of making raids into the surrounding country. These were a source of alarm and anxiety among the people, and they were constantly on the watch to defend their property and themselves as best they could. One day, Dr. Charles Dandridge went over to one of our neighbors, Mr. Barber's, to practice shooting and to see if he had heard anything new about the war. It was the custom of the home guards to meet weekly and practice with their firearms in order to be the better prepared, as they pretended, for any sudden incursion of the now dreaded Yankee. Mr. Barber had gotten a Yankee pistol from some friend who was in the army, and Dr. Charles wanted to see and try it. It was shown it was shown him and its workings explained. It took he took it and began shooting, and in showing the other men how quickly he could shoot a Yankee and mount his horse, he accidentally shot himself under the short rib near his heart and fell to the ground. All the men came running to him, picked him up, and carried him into the house, immediately sending words to Mrs. Dandridge and Master Jack McGee, his father-in-law. The boys came hurrying in and, and told us what had happened. I hitched up and drove Boss over to Mr. Barber's. He found We found the wounded man rapidly sinking, and when a little later his wife came, he could not speak, only claps her hand. He died that night, and we carried his body to the home, which so short at time before he had left in health and high spirits. No casket was to be had. Everything of that kind had been consumed or shut out by the war. Accordingly, two slaves were ordered to make a coffin, which they did using plain boards. It was then covered with black alpaca from a dress of the madam, and lined with the cloth from Mrs. Dangerous' opera cloak. The regular material used for these purposes was not to be had. By the time the coffin was ready, the body was so bloated that it could not be got into it. Resort was then had to a plain box, and his and this the body of another of the stricken family group was laid away. And the suggestion of old Master Jack, the coffin, at the suggestion of old Master Jack, the coffin was put up in the carriage house for safekeeping. He saying it would not do for him to be buried in. Sorrow had come to his family with such crushing force that their former pride and boastful spirit had given place to utter dejection.
Mm-mm-mm. Thank you for that, Brother B. Very interesting. Very interesting. We are fragile. We are but dust. Substitutes for coffee. This is the last uh, portion in the chapter. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. During the war, everything was scarce and dear, and substitutes were devised for many of the things which had formerly been regarded as the necessaries of life. Sweet potatoes were peeled and cut in small pieces and put on out in the sun to dry. They were then used as a substitute for coffee. When that article became so scarce towards the close of the war, great quantities of this preparation were used. Okra was another substitute for coffee. Are you hearing this? It was dried in the pod, then the seeds shelled out, and these were ground again and prepared something as coffee is.
Hmm.
This made a delicious drink when served with cream, but very rich and pleasant to the taste. Quinine was a medicine that had been of almost universal use in the South, yet it became so scarce that it was sold as $7 a bottle and could not often be had at that price. Lemon leaves were used as a substitute in cases of chills and fevers. The leaves were made into a tea and given to the patient hot to produce perspiration. During an attack of chills, I was treating this matter to some advantage. At any rate, I got well, which cannot always be said of the methods of treatment. Well, that's a shot of vitamin C if they're giving them lemon leaves. And that's the end of chapter 3. And now we're up to chapter 4. Rebellion, weakening slaves, hopes, and strengthening. So we're going to read a few of these. I'll read 2, and then, brother, you can read. Let's see.
Okay.
And then we'll see how it goes. McGee's slaves taken to Alabama. While I was absent on my last runaway trip, because by this time he had 4. I don't know how caught up, but by this time he's tried to run away 4 times. So he says, when I was absent on my last runaway trip, the Yankees had made a raid through Panola, and our people had become greatly frightened. As soon as they had got back with me and my fellow runaways, they assembled a gang of slaves for the purpose of taking them to Atlanta, Georgia, to get them out of the reach of the Union soldiers. Among the slaves selected for the transfer were myself, my wife, Matilda, and the seamstress. The others all belonged to Dr. Dandruff and Blayton McGee. Both Mrs. Doctors Dandruff went with us to Atlanta. We traveled across the country until we came to Demopolis, Alabama, where we found Boss camped on the bank of the Tombigbee River with all the farm slaves from Bolivar. So now they're running across the country with still trying to hold on to their servants. This was the first time I had seen Boss since he was captured and taken to Helena. As my wife and I were the only ones in the gang who belonged to Boss, we left those with whom we had come and joined his gang. We all then went aboard a boat and were taken to the salt works situated on the Tombigbee, 90 miles from Mobile. These salt works belonged to the rebel government. The first president of the works was Mr. Woolsey of Salem, Alabama. During Mr. Woolsey's term, the first part of 1864, when we had been there some time, he wrote to Boss asking if he would sell myself and my wife and offering $3,000 for us both. Boss was indignant at this and curtly refused. My wife acted as a cook at the salt works and in the headquarters for the president, managers, and clerks. Mr. Woolsey was delighted with her cooking. Her bread and her rolls, he said, could not be surpassed. Mr. McGee, so they don't want to pay nobody. They paying the European. He not doing the work. And anywho, McGee's great scheme. When the election of the officers of the works came off in the fall, Mr. Gallatin McGee was chosen president. Boss then hired us all, about 100 in number, in labor in these works, but he, of course, received all the revenue. I just said it. I didn't even know that this next line was here, but that's what's on my mind. Like, hold up. Again, he says the man received all the revenue. It says, the work assigned me was that of a butler at headquarters, and my wife was cook. Both women and children, as well as men, were employed in these works. After some months' labor here, soon after Gallatin McGee became president, Matilda and I was removed to Montgomery headquarters, where we remained until nearly Christmas. A few days before the time, Boss came to Montgomery and arranged for us to meet him in Mobile. We started at the appointed time, reached the city in the morning, and I went directly to the hotel where he told me he would be. I found him at once, and he informed me all about his plans for the future and what he expected to accomplish. Yeah, on somebody else's back. We had purchased an island in the bay, a little way from Mobile, where he had decided to establish salt works of his own. All the brick and lumber for the buildings had been carried there, and work upon them was to be commenced immediately after Christmas. He intended to make a home for the family on the island, and as soon as he could complete the works, to remove all his hands from the government works to his own. He was very enthusiastic over this scheme, claiming that he would make far more money but by it than he was then receiving from hiring out his slaves. He told me he would remain in Mobile 2 or 3 days and would go to Panola to spend the holidays, after which he intended to bring all the family to Mobile and remain there until the island was in readiness to be occupied. There was to be a general breakup of the old home and the beginning of a new manner of life. I stayed in this room at the hotel all the forenoon listening to his plans. Then I went back where my wife was stopping. As I left the room, he said, Lou, as he always called me, I will see you and Matilda at the boat this evening. We went to the boat at the appointed time and saw the boss, but he did not come near us. As the boat was about to put off, I looked and saw him walking up and down the levee, apparently much excited, running his hands nervously through his hair, a habit common to him when he was worried. He seemed greatly distressed. The military situation troubled him, for the Union Army had conquered nearly everything. And the fact now stared him in the face that he would soon lose his slaves, because he wouldn't be rich without them, right? He never dreamed in the beginning of the war that the Unionists would conquer and that the slaves would be free. But now he saw that not only all the wealth in the bodies and the souls of men was slipping away from him, but that much, if not all, of the gain ill-gotten with these chattels, sorry, that's Amuna talking, had brought him was likely to, quote, take wings and fly. So dude had a big old fat scheme, and now he's a bit uncertain, because it's looking uncertain. So McGee dies. Chill. Okay, brother, Abia, you can take that.
All right.
McGee dies. What's going on here?
McGee's death. We returned to the salt works the morning after leaving Mobile. Boss remained 2 days in Mobile and then started for Panola, the home of his father-in-law. But on his way, he was taken sick, having contracted a heavy cold which ran into pneumonia, and he lasted only a short time, dying on New Year's Day. He had taken cold in bringing the slaves from Bolivar over the river on barges. The river was overflowed about 50 miles out. The only way he could get the slaves across was by using large barges made of logs. They were several days floating down in this way before he could get out to the railroad at Jackson, Mississippi, where he transferred them to the cars. This was too much of an exposure and it killed him. After Boss died, all the plans were changed. Colonel Hunting, son-in-law of old Master Jack, came down to the salt works and hired us all out of there for another year. This was the beginning of the year 1865 of Master's plans concerning the island and his proposed salt works. The family knew little, for they questioned me closely as to what he told me of the matter. What he spent on the island in lumber, brick, etc., was lost, as they knew nothing of the particulars of the expenditure. The madam remained at her father's and the slaves at the works. I make some money. As as I was here for another year acting as butler, thought I would try and see if I could not make some money for myself. I asked Mr. Brooks, the manager of the works, if he could get me some tobacco by sending to Mobile for it. He said he could, and on the fourth day thereafter, in the evening, it came. I was anxious to get it in the same evening, but Mr. Brooks said, "Oh, I guess you had better wait until morning. Then, when you finish your work, come down to the office and get it. You will then have more time to see the boys in the works." In the morning, I was up early, and after doing my morning work, I was off to Brooks' office. When I went in, he said, "There it is under the table." The package was so small, I felt disappointed. $100 worth ought to be more, said I to myself, but I took it and went out among the men. I thought I would try to sell it at $5 a plug, and if I could not sell it at that, I would take $4. I would take $4. I must make something, for I had borrowed the money to buy it with, and I saw that to clear anything on it, I must at least get $4 a plug. The money which I had borrowed was from three fellow servants who had been fortunate in earning some little time and had saved their money. The first man I met in the works bought two plugs at $5 each, and after I had been there about an hour, all was sold. So I went back with a light heart. Mr. Brooks said to me at dinner, "Well, how did you get along with your tobacco?" "I did very well," I said. "The only trouble was I did not have enough. I sold it for $180. "Well," said he, if you did, you made more clear money than the works here. How much a plug did you sell it for?" At the same time drawing out his pencil and commencing to figure it up. "I had 36 plugs," said I, "and I sold them for $5 a plug." Nothing more was said just then, but after find my place. Nothing more was said just then, but after dinner, Brooks and two of the clerks went out of the veranda to smoke. When they were in a good way of smoking, Brooks slipped into the dining room and said, "Well, that was fine. You got $5 a plug for the tobacco." "Oh, yes," I said. "Tobacco is scarce, and they were hungry for it. It went like hotcakes." The price was not questioned. I sold at once. What is the prospect for selling more? He asked. Will you sell it for half the profit if I furnish the tobacco? I said yes. So he sent the same day for a box of tobacco, about 500 plugs. When the tobacco came, the box was sawed in two and one half sent up to my room. I put some fellow I put some fellows out as agents to sell for me. Uncle Uncle Hudson, who took care of the horses and mules at the works, John at the hospital, William, the head chopper among the 100 men in the woods, each brought in from $40 to $50 every 2 or 3 days and took another supply. Sometimes when I finished with my work in the afternoon, I would get an old pony and go around through the neighborhood and sell 4 or 5 plugs. It was a mystery to the servants how I got the tobacco, but I did not let on that Mr. Brooks was backing me. In 2 weeks, we had taken in $1,600, and I was happy as I could be. Brooks was a fine fellow, a northerner by birth, and did just what he said he would. I received one half of the money. Of course, this was all rebel money, but I was sharp, and I bought up all the silver I could find. Just as we got on the other half of the box, Brooks received word that the Yankees were coming and to send all the hands to the masters. I was glad that I had made some money, knowing that I would need it if I gained my freedom, which I now knew was quite probable as the Union forces were gaining ground everywhere. But the message ended my money making, and I prepared to go home to Panola. Did I continue?
That man, that was interesting. Dude was singing a Biggie Small song. Like he was dude was flipping it. It's very interesting that in this space and time, what do you say, 1865, he had
Right,
a backer. You know what I'm saying? Like the other story of Freeway Ricky Ross, nobody knew where he was getting this from. They had a market, and he was willing to give him half, this European, this northerner, um, to for them to do all the work, and then he gets his homies to go.
right.
I'm like, what is this? Like, is this a plan for how to, flip stuff? What's going on? But yeah, I didn't expect that. That one was left field for me. Okay, um, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read. What are your thoughts on that, brother? That was kind of wild.
Yeah, it was interesting reading it and finding out it was, it sounded very much like, what we witnessed growing up and what we even now know today about how that whole process works. And it's just kind of trippy to read about
Okay.
the whole enterprise
Yeah,
going back, that far.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I also find it interesting that at this time, I think that I have to do my research, but I think they were because he said it was Union money, not Union money, it was rebel money. And so he understood that this wasn't going to be worth much longer. So he flipped it and he took it out of the paper bag basically and put it into silver. And that this is very interesting. Let me just say that. I gotta mark this page, and come back and take a look at that. So let me see here. Going back to Panola, he says, Mr. Brooks fixed the return paper so that my wife and I could leave the party of slaves at Demiopolis and go to thence to Panola by rail to convey the news to Madame that all hands were coming home, that the Yankees were expected to capture the salt works within a short time. At Jackson, some 7 miles from the salt works, we were delayed overnight by reason of lack of facilities for crossing the Tombigbee River. The report that the Yankees were coming through had created a panic among the white people, and hundreds fleeing from their homes had gathered at the river, waiting and clamoring for an opportunity to cross. Though slaves were property and valuable at that point, the whites seemed to think that their own lives were in danger and to be protected first. Hmm. They therefore took precedence of us. In the morning, about 7 o'clock, a steamer was seen coming at a distance, but it could not be discovered at once just what the character of it was. The whites became alarmed. Some said, "The Yankees are coming." Others said, "It's a gunboat. They will surely fire on us." But as the boat drew near, the people saw that there was nothing to fear. It was only the regular passenger boat. Besides the hundreds of people, there were scores of wagons filled with household goods to go over, and the passage was slow and tedious. We finally got across and traveled as far as Demiopolis, where Matilda and I left the other slaves and took a train and went to Panola. I delivered a paper to Madame from Brooks, which told her all the particulars concerning the breakup at the salt works. She sent wagons right away after the other slaves who were coming back on foot. They were not brought back to Padola, but were hired out to different farmers along the road home, some in Jackson, some in Granda, and others in Panola town. They were all small towns in Mississippi. My wife and I went to work at old Master Jack's. I on the farm and my wife at her old duties in the house. We longed for freedom, but were content for the time with hoping and praying for the coming of the day when it should be realized. It was sad to see the changes that had come to the white folk. Why he keep saying that? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's some
Why does
serious
he keep saying that?
logical.
Yes, the psychological effects. He says it was sad to see the changes that had come to the white folks. Sorrow had left its impression upon all, and we felt it, notwithstanding all that we had suffered at their hands. It's the second time he said that. He says, Boss had willed the homestead in Memphis to Mrs. Farrington, and she was getting ready to take possession. He had borrowed a great amount of money from her when he had bought the island in Mobile, and the rapid coming on the end of the rebellion destroyed all prospects of the success of his salt work scheme even before his death and really rendered him bankrupt. Hence, the transfer of the Memphis property to her was the only way he could make good what he owed her. The madame now had no home, but was compelled to stay with her father, old Master Jack. Mhm. She was sadly changed, did not appear like the same person. Her troubles and sorrows had crushed her former cruel and haughty spirit. Her mother had died a few months before, and then her husband had followed, dying suddenly and away from home. Then much of her property had been lost, and social pleasures and distinction were gone forever. Who shall say that the wrongs done her poor, helpless slaves were not avenged in this life? Question, he asked. The last I knew of her, she was still at her father's. And we shall read incidents. We trying to catch up here because we was a little bit behind. So we're gonna read a few more. I'll read incidents. A servant who belonged to Dr. Dan just ran away and got to Memphis just after it was captured by the Union soldiers. He was put into the army and was stationed at one of the entrances to the city. He was to halt all persons passing to or from the city, no difference who they were, and learn their names and their business. Young William McGee and his sister, Mrs. Cherry, one day went up to Memphis and, to their surprise, were halted by this former servant of their uncle. Talk about irony. Okay. It says, when they came home, they were speaking of it to their father, and old Master Jack said, "And you halted, did you?" "Why, yes," replied William, "we had to do it." "Well," said the old man, "I would have died before I would have done it. To think that a servant should have halted you, and one who has belonged to the family like Anderson." This old man, notwithstanding all his boasting in the absence of immediate danger, was the veriest coward when danger was present. He had a lot of talk, but yeah, if somebody run up on him, he changed his talk quick. And if he had been in the place of the young William, he would have halted with the great alacrity. Now you know I'm gonna have to look this word up. ALAC, alacrity. It says, while at the salt works, I had a little experience at nursing. A fellow slave was taken ill, and I was called on to care for him at night. I always liked this work. It was a pleasure to me to be in the sick room. Typhoid fever was a new case to me, but I remember what instructions boss had given me about it. Pitched in to do what I could, but the fever was so great, he lasted only a few days.
Mm.
Yeah. It's easy. I mean, this is interesting as it relates to the fall of a social construct and how power is elusive, and at which point now the tides turn. All of a sudden, people's spirits get different. They
Yeah.
humble down. You know what I'm saying? You pop in. No, I wouldn't have done that, because now you no longer have any power in your hand, and that's really how fragile and temperamental this whole, even today, the construct in which we live in. And it's just a reminder, because the slaves at this time, these people were invincible. You couldn't go up against their system, and they're watching it crumble right in front of their faces. So
Yeah.
yeah. Very, very interesting. Let's see what time it is. What time is it, brother Abia? I got company today, so I'm going in. I'll have to read it all by my lonesome. You wanna? This one is kind of long here. Let's see.
Fifth strike.
I'll read one more, and then you can read "Going Back for Our Wives." I think it's appropriate to have a male read that. So I'm gonna read my fifth strike for freedom is a success. Hallelujah! I didn't even read it yet. I'm excited. And then you can read "Going Back for Our Wives." This is his fifth time now. He says,
Okay.
we had remained at Old Jack's until June 1865. And for those who don't know, we know 1865 is going to be the end of the Civil War. And so it's coming. And had tried to be content. The Union soldiers were still raiding all through that section. Every day, some town would be taken, and the slaves would secretly rejoice. After we came back from Alabama, we were held with a tighter rein than ever. We were not allowed to go outside of the premises. George Washington, a fellow servant, and Kitty, his wife, and I had talked considerable about. I'm like, oh, chill, George Washington. He said there's a servant named George Washington.
You're right. That threw
I'm
me
like,
too.
what? Okay, a fellow servant and Kitty, his wife, and I had talked considerably about the Yankees and how we might get away. We knew it was our right to be free, for the proclamation had been issued. Yet they still held us. This is something we see throughout a lot of the narratives, that these Europeans, even after it was issued, they either tricked or held on to or never told the former enslaved that they were free. So it says, we knew it was our right to be free, for the proclamation had long been issued, yet they still held us. I did not talk much to my wife about going away, as she was always so afraid I would be killed and did not want me to try any more to escape. But George, his wife, and I continued to discuss the matter whenever we had a chance. We knew that Memphis was headquarters for the Union troops, but how to reach it was the great question. It was Sunday, and I had driven one portion of the family to church and George the other. The family was now very large, as the madame and her family were there. As the madame and her family was there, in addition to old Master Jacks, and all could not go into one carriage. On the way back, young William McGee came up through the farm on horseback and near a way home from church, and encouraged several servants belonging to some of the neighbors. He asked them what they were doing there, and if they had passes. To this last question, all answered no. Well, said he, never come here again without having passes, all of you. At this, they all quickened and disappeared. When old Jack came home, Will told him what had passed, and he immediately called for George and Uncle Peter, the foreman, and told them that no one not belonging to there was to come into the quarters without a pass. And any servant with a pass should be brought to the house, that the pass might be inspected. It sounds like school. Like, what are you doing in the halls? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, what are you doing here without your hall pass? You got a bathroom pass? It says they thought or feared that if the servants were permitted to come together freely, they may plan ways of escape. Still very real today. Like, what are you Negroes doing talking? It says here, and communicate to each other what they knew about the war and the Yankees. George came out and finding me told me what they had said. No slave from outside is to be allowed on this place, said he. I replied, if we listen to them, we shall be here until Christmas comes again. What do you mean? Asked George. I mean that now, today is the time to make a start. So late in the afternoon during the servants' prayer meeting, because we read about that before, that the Europeans would go in the morning and then they would allow their servants to, and this is to this day, a lot of so-called black people love being in church all 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the evening. This is an extension of where this is coming from. Um, it says here, what did he say? He says, so late in the afternoon during the servants' prayer meetings, of which I have heretofore spoken, we thought we would be a good time. We thought would be a good time to get away, as no one would be likely to see us. We talked with John Smith, another servant, and told him all about our plan, asking not to say a word about our being gone until he was through feeding the stock. This would give us another hour to advance on our journey, as the feeding usually took about that time from 6 o'clock until 7. Our fear was that we might be overtaken by the bloodhounds, and therefore we wished to get as far as possible before the white people knew we were gone. It was Sunday afternoon, June 26, 1865. Wow, that date is very interesting. That's an interesting date. It was Sunday afternoon when George and I, having made ready for the start for the Union lines, went to bid our wives goodbye. I told my wife to cheer up as I was coming again to get her. I said to Kitty, George's wife, we're going, but look for us again. It will not be with us as we so many others. We have gone away, leaving their families and never returning. Keep that in mind. Who have gone away, leaving their families and never returning. We will be here again, he declares. Because a lot of people, a lot of men ran off for the freedom, but never came back. She looked up at me, smiling, and with a look of resolution said, I'll be ready. She was a firm, daring nature. I did not fear to tell her all my plans. As my wife was so timid, I said as little as possible to her. George and I hurried, said our farewells to our wives. The parting was heart-rending, for we knew the dangers were great, and the chances were almost even that we should not meet again. I could hardly leave my wife. Her agitation and grief was so great, but we were off in a few moments. We crept through the orchard, passing through farm after farm until we struck the railroad about 7 miles from home. We followed this road until we reached Senatobia. About 7:30 in the evening, we felt good and stopped all night. We started the next morning for Hernando, Mississippi, another small town, and reached there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The most of the bridges had been burned by the troops, and there were no regular railroad trains. Fortunately, however, flat cars drawn by horses were run over the road, and on a trail of this kind, we took passage. On several occasions, the passengers had to get out and push the car over a bridge. I can't. They had to push the car over the bridge. He says, as it was not made so horses could cross on it. The horses, meantime, being driven or led through the stream and then hitched to the car again. After we had gone through this process repeatedly, we at last reached Memphis, arriving about 7 o'clock Monday evening. The city was filled with slaves from all over the South who cheered and gave us a welcome. I could scarcely recognize Memphis. He says, things were so changed. We met numbers of our fellow servants who had run away before us when the war began. Tuesday and Wednesday we spent in making inquiries, and I visited our old home at McGee Station. But how different it was from what it had been when the McGees were there. All was changed. Thursday, we went to see Colonel Walker, a Union officer who looked after the colored folks and saw that they had their rights. When we reached this office, we found it so filled with people waiting to see him that we were delayed about 2 hours before we had an opportunity to speak with him. When our turn came, we went in and told him that we were citizens of Memphis until the fall of Fort Pillow and Donaldson, when our master had run us off with 100 other slaves into Mississippi and thence to the salt works in Alabama. He questioned us as to where we lived in Memphis. I answered, what is now headquarters of the Union forces was the home of Master Mr. Edmund McGee, who is now dead. After a few minutes, I said, Colonel, we want protection to go back to Mississippi after our wives, who are still held as slaves. He replied, you are both free men to go and come as you please. Why, said I, Colonel, if we go back to Mississippi, they will shoot the gizzards out of us. Well, said he, I cannot grant your request. I would be overrun with similar applications, but I will tell you what you can do. There are hundreds of just such men as you who would be glad on such a scout. We thanked him and left. So he was like, yo, mount up, get your troops, and go down
Right.
and do a rescue mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, brother, that's you going back for our wives, and then we're gonna stop at that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Going back for our wives. After carefully considering the matter, we concluded to go back to Senatobia and see the captain of the Union troops there. The next day, Friday, we hired a 2-horse wagon and made preparations to start on a perilous undertaking Saturday morning. It was our hope to find someone at Senatobia to go with us to Panola and protect us in the effort to bring away our wives. So early in the morning, we set out. Our first stop was at Big Springs Camping Ground, where we made preparations for refreshing ourselves and spending the night. Just as we had finished building a fire for cooking and keeping off the mosquitoes, 2 soldiers came riding up the spring, riding up to the spring. Hello, said one. Which way are you traveling? We are just from Memphis, said George. Have you any whiskey? Asked one of them. We replied, yes. Would you give a fellow a horn? We answered the question by handing them the bottle. While they were drinking, George and I stepped aside, and after a few moments' talk, we decided to put the question to them of going with us to get our wives. I asked, where are you from? Senatobia, replied one. We at once laid our cause before them, telling them that Colonel Walker had said regarding our getting someone to go with us on our enterprise. They listened attentively, and when we had finished, one of them asked, how much whiskey have you? George answered, 2 bottles. What do you intend to do when you see the captain at Senatobia? Lay our complaint before him, said I. Now, my friend, said one of the soldiers, I am afraid if you go to the captain, you will be defeated. But I'll tell you what I'll do. Give my comrade and me one of your bottles of whiskey, and we will put on a straight track. We will put you on a straight track. The reason why I say this is that our captain has been sweetened. The reason why I say this is that our captain has been sweetened by the rebel farmers. He is invited out to tea by them every evening. I know he will put you off, but I will write a note to some comrades of mine who I know will bring you out safe. We agreed at once to this proposition and gave them the whiskey. He wrote the note and gave it to us, telling us to go to the last tent on the line in the camp, where he would find 2 boys to whom we should give it. They are brave, said he, and the only 2 I know of that can help you. If they are not there, don't give the note to anyone else, but wait till they come back on Tuesday night. I feel satisfied that they will go and help you out. With these words, they rode off. George and I felt good of our prospects. The next morning was Sunday, and we started on, reaching Senatobia about 11 o'clock. We went into the camp following the directions given us to go to the last tent in the line, but when we reached there, the soldiers were out. We lingered around the grounds a short time, then went back and found them there. We gave them the note and After reading it, they simply asked us where we had stopped our wagon. I told them outside the village. Go there, said one of them, and remain until we come out to see you. Shortly, they came out, and after we told them what we wanted, the distance to McGee's, which was about 19 miles from Senatobia, and had given them such other information as they desired, they concluded that they would go. We want we want to be back, said I, before daylight Monday morning because we must not be seen on the road, for we are well known in that section, and if discovered, would be captured and killed. Well, said one of the soldiers, we will have to go back to camp and arrange to be excused from roll call this evening before we can make the trip. They went back to camp, and in about 10 minutes they came out again saying, all is right, we will go. We gave them each $10 and promised if they brought us out safely to give each $10 more. It was now about half past 11 o'clock. They had to go to camp and slip their horses out cautiously so as not to be seen by the captain. Half an hour we were on our way, and after we had ridden some 2 miles, we were all overtaken by the two soldiers. It was Sunday afternoon, and our having a wagon attracted much attention from the farmers as we passed along. They looked at us sharply. They looked at us so sharply that George and I felt decidedly uneasy, yet we kept up courage and pressed steadily on. After a long way and weary ride, we reached old Master Jack's a little after sundown. The soldiers rode into the yard ahead of us, and the first person they met was a servant, Frank, at the woodpile. They said to him, go in and tell your master, Mr. McGee, to come out. We want to see him. At the same time, asking for Lewis and George's wives. Young William McGee came out, and the soldier said to him, we want feed for 75 heads of horses. McGee said, we have not got it. Just then George and I were coming up. We drove in at the gate through the grove and past the woodpile where McGee and the soldiers were talking. McGee had just replied, we have not got that much feed to spare. We are almost out. Well, said the soldiers, we must have it. And they followed on right after the wagons. As we drove past them, young McGee went running into the house saying to his mother, it's Lewis and George, and I'll kill one of them tonight. This raised quite an alarm, and the members of the family told him not to do that, as it would ruin them. As soon as George and I drove up to the first cabin, which was my wife's and Kitty's, we ran in. Kitty met us at the door and said, I am all ready. She was looking for us. We commenced loading our wagon with our few things. Meanwhile, the soldiers had ridden around a few rods and came upon old Master Jack and the minister of the parish, who were watching as guards to keep the slaves from running away to the Yankees. Just think of the outrage upon those poor creatures. Wait, just think of the outrage upon those poor creatures and forcibly retaining them in slavery long after the proclamation making them free had gone into effect beyond all question. As the soldiers rode up to the two men, they said, hello, what are you doing here? What have you not told these two men, Lewis and George, that they are free men, that they can go and come as they like? By this time, all the family were aroused, and great excitement prevailed. The soldiers' presence drew all the servants near. George and I hurried to fill up our wagon, telling our wives to get in, as there was no time to lose. We must go at once. In 20 minutes, we were all loaded. My wife, Aunt Kitty, and 9 other servants followed the wagon. I waited for a few moments for Mary Ellen, sister of my wife, as she came running out the white folks' house. She said to her mistress, Mrs. Farrington, "Goodbye. I wish you good luck. I wish you all the I wish you all the bad luck," said she in a rage. But Mary did not stop to notice her mistress further, and joining me, we were soon on the road following the wagon.
Oh man, this thing getting sweet. This thing is like I want to thank Brother Abiyah for coming in and holding it down, holding it up with me, getting us through. We probably have one more reading of this book and we'll be done. That was an interesting scene, and I'll keep saying it. You know, it's my little theory as the days and the weeks and the years go on. This seems just like a very terrible, and I've said it many times, domestic violence situation. Like
Yeah,
this is for me the best that I can explain the relationship. Because look at this woman. She apparently feels Miss Farrington. She tells her, I wish you bad luck. Like, okay, you apparently feel like they owe you something. Like you know, it's not, never mind the fact that you had them in slavery and you mistreated them and you did all these things. And now, how dare you leave me?
yeah,
It's like the psycho partner, whether it be male or female. I've done all of this stuff for you. How could you leave me? You know, it sounds
yeah.
crazy. That's what it sounds. It sounds real crazy. But your thoughts on this? I want to thank you again, Brother Bi. What are your thoughts on what we've read in this reading?
Thank you for having me on again. Yeah, I think a lot of it, reading a lot of this, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it the last time that I was on. At that time, we were reading Harriet Jacobs, um, and it's very reminiscent of what I witnessed a lot growing up. I'm originally from Mississippi, born and raised there, and even then, like growing up in the '80s and the '90s, really not much had changed. And you would think, this is 100 years from the time period that we're reading about now in 1865, and it was still very much, in 1980, 1990, this this type of anger and resentment towards quote unquote black people for not for wanting to be free, or like it was still very much a divide. Like so many southern towns in Mississippi still at the time of my upbringing were divided by a railroad track, and they still implemented different things in order to the same way, like in what we're reading now, how they withheld the information that the proclamation had been issued, and that so people were still not knowing that they were free. I feel like that carried on for decades, and they still implemented things like I can't think of the name of it at the moment, but the divide in the school systems, like all of the white schools had become like private schools, so there was no like intermixing of like integration, essentially, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing, integration, but I don't know, it's just the whole thing is crazy. And then what we read earlier, just kind of backtracking some about what they would do as kind of a warning sign, or to kind of like jar up fear in the hearts of the slaves, hanging the slaves. That made me think about the most recent episode of uh, the Underground, that WGN show that we've been watching, about that whole dynamic with I believe his name is Sam, like how he was hung and how, that whole thing. It's just, it's crazy. It's just really crazy. And being able to see, read about what we're seeing, you know, take place in that show.
Agreed. That show again. That's we're reading it and hopefully, and we're watching it. And I thank you for sharing your experience in growing up in Mississippi. That I watched just some documentaries that some people still didn't know they were free in those quarters, well into the 1950s and 1960s, still working as sharecroppers. And I came across an elder who told me, yes, it's true. He grew up on a plantation that was bequeathed, he said, to his family after slavery, and he grew up working on it. So I'm like, wow, okay. And I think if he's from Mississippi, so definitely in those places some thought processes still exist. But as you said, us watching the WGN Underground series is to see and hear, exactly what it is that we just read, and to see it come to life and to understand what came to my mind when he was saying it. I forgot about Sam, but what came to my mind was how they're using the youth, the so-called black youth, as an example and allowing these things just in the same way. If a quote unquote nigga, as they would say, try to run away, then you had the right to X, Y, and Z. And then we turn around in this day and time and you see it happening over and over again with um, no one really brought into account for these murders. Nothing much has changed. Nothing much
Yeah,
has changed. How many 100+ years later? And so that's what came to my mind when he was talking about the psychology, because I'm very much interested in psychology, and he was going into psychology of why they were doing what they're doing, and furthermore the psychology of it today. So now when you see somebody, you teach a young man, don't, the patty rollers, ain't nothing much changed. The patty rollers became the patrollers who are the police. And so
right.
you see the patty rollers, you run. You understand? And when you see the patty rollers, they're going to come get you. Nothing has changed except for the uniform. The mentality, like you said, still remains, and it's for us to really understand where we are, and for everybody, but because a lot of times so-called white people as well are not aware of this history, or choose to block it out, or choose to pretend like it doesn't exist. And it really behooves everyone that was instrumental in this institution of slavery, because it wasn't a one-legged tango. So everyone who was damaged by this institution needs to reassess and look back at it for what it was. You understand? And then prayerfully move from there. So I want to thank Brother Abiyah for tuning in and for sharing and raising your voice. And if you're out there, I know we get a good amount of listens. And I know some people tell me they like to listen, but we would love to hear your voice as well and help us get through these narratives. So once again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. My name is Amuna Yisrael. Brother Abiyah, you're always welcome to come back. Just shoot me an email like you do, and we can make it happen.
Absolutely.
I hope you have a blessed night, and everybody who's listening, have a great night as well. Shalom.
Shalom.